I never thought the prenuptial agreement my wealthy in-laws forced me to sign would be their undoing. As a self-made software developer from a modest background, I was already an outsider when I fell in love with Audrey, the daughter of prominent real estate developers. Days before our wedding, her father thrust papers at me that were designed to protect their fortune from someone they deemed unworthy. Now, 5 years later, that same prenup has become an ironic instrument of justice after their financial empire crumbled and my wife betrayed me. Before I share how this prenup meant to protect them from me ended up being their own downfall, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe if you have ever dealt with in-laws who thought you were not good enough. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Cincinnati, the son of a postal worker and a nurse. My parents instilled in me the values of hard work and education, scraping together enough for me to attend state college where I studied computer science. After graduation, I built my software consulting business from nothing, specializing in security systems for small to mid-sized companies. I was proud of what I had accomplished by age 28, even if my net worth did not include any family money or connections. I met Audrey at a charity gala where I was providing technical support for the auction software. She was there representing her family foundation, looking elegant in a designer gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. When the bidding system crashed, I was called to fix it, working frantically behind the scenes while wealthy donors grew impatient. "You look like you could use this," a voice said, offering me a glass of water. It was Audrey, who had slipped away from the main event to check on the progress. Unlike the other organizers who had been demanding and condescending, she was patient and even asked intelligent questions about what had gone wrong. We talked for 20 minutes while I restored the system, and by the time the auction was back online, I had somehow secured a date with her for the following weekend. It felt like winning the lottery. Our romance progressed quickly. Audrey was beautiful, cultured, and seemed genuinely interested in my work despite our different backgrounds. She laughed at my jokes, asked about my family, and never made me feel less than because I could not afford the luxuries she took for granted. The first meeting with her parents, Richard and Elaine Maxwell, was a different story entirely. Their mansion, in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city, had a gate, a circular driveway, and actual staff who took my coat and offered drinks. Richard, a tall man with silver hair and a perpetual frown, barely shook my hand before interrogating me about my business. Software security. Is it small market? Limited growth potential, he dismissed, despite knowing nothing about my industry. Elaine was more subtle but equally dismissive, asking which country club my parents belonged to and which prep school I had attended. Learning I had gone to public school and state college visibly disappointed her. Bennett has built his business completely on his own. Audrey defended me. He has clients across 3 states now. How quaint, Elaine replied with a thin smile. After that disastrous dinner, Audrey assured me they would come around eventually. "They are just protective," she explained. "They will see how happy you make me and accept you." I wanted to believe her. 9 months into our relationship, I proposed with a ring that cost me 3 months of income. It was nothing compared to the jewelry Audrey already owned, but she cried and said yes immediately. Her parents responded to our engagement announcement with tight smiles and a terse congratulations. The wedding plans quickly spiraled into an extravagant affair, orchestrated entirely by Elaine. My input was neither sought nor welcomed. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Richard called me to his office for what he termed a chat between men. His corner office overlooked the city from the top floor of the building his company owned. He gestured for me to sit across from him, then pushed a thick document across his mahogany desk. "This is a standard prenuptial agreement," he said casually. "Nothing to worry about if your intentions toward my daughter are as pure as you claim." There was nothing standard about it. The prenup stipulated that all gifts or investments from Audrey's family would remain separate property. Any growth in my business during the marriage would be considered separate property that Audrey had no claim to, regardless of any support she provided. Most concerning was the infidelity clause, which would severely penalize me financially if I ever cheated, with no similar consequence for Audrey. "My lawyer will need to review this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Richard's expression hardened. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. We need this finalized immediately." When I discussed it with Audrey that night, she burst into tears. "Please just sign it," she begged. "It is just paperwork to make them feel better. It will never matter to us because we will be together forever." My own lawyer was blunt. "This is completely one-sided. They are treating you like a potential con artist." But I was in love with Audrey, not her money. After minimal negotiations that improved almost nothing, I signed the document 3 days before our wedding, telling myself it was worth it to start our marriage without conflict. Our wedding was a society event with 500 guests, most of whom I had never met. I felt like a prop in someone else's production. Audrey looked stunning, and in the moments we had alone, she seemed as in love as ever. I clung to those moments during the reception as Richard gave a speech that mentioned my name exactly once. The early years of our marriage revealed aspects of Audrey I had not seen during our courtship. Her spending habits were extravagant in ways I had not anticipated. She thought nothing of dropping $5,000 on a handbag or $10,000 on redecorating a room on a whim. When I expressed concern, she reminded me that her family had provided our house as a wedding gift, so her purchases were trivial in comparison. Meanwhile, my business was growing steadily. I had expanded to 15 employees and opened a second office in a neighboring state. Richard frequently offered unsolicited advice, suggesting risky expansions and leveraged investments that went against my cautious approach to business. "You will never create real wealth by playing it safe," he would lecture over holiday dinners. I nodded politely while continuing to build my company my way brick by brick. The resentment grew on both sides. Richard saw me as stubborn and unambitious, while I saw him as recklessly overconfident. Audrey remained caught in the middle, defending her father while assuring me she supported my decisions too. Despite these tensions, I still believed we had a solid marriage. I was wrong. The first sign that Richard and Elaine's real estate empire was in trouble came during our 3rd year of marriage. The market had begun to cool after years of unsustainable growth, but Richard was still breaking ground on luxury developments across 3 states. "The market is just taking a breather," he assured everyone at a family dinner when Elaine mentioned an investor pulling out of their newest project. "The weak hands are folding. More opportunity for those of us with vision." But I noticed how he changed the subject whenever specific projects were mentioned. His usual boasting about pre-sales and return rates was replaced with vague statements about long-term growth strategies. As someone who worked in risk assessment, the shift in his language raised immediate red flags. A month later, Richard asked to meet me for lunch at his club. He spent the first 30 minutes discussing golf and politics before finally getting to the point. "The timing on our lakeside development is a bit tight," he said casually. "Banks are being unreasonably cautious in this climate. I was thinking you might want to get involved given how well your business is doing." Get involved, how I asked, though I already knew. A temporary capital injection. $200,000 would help bridge a gap while we wait for some other investors to finalize their commitments. That was a significant portion of my business operating capital, but before I could respond, he added, "Audrey is very excited about this property. She has already picked out which unit she wants us to give you too as an anniversary gift once it is complete." I told him I would need to review my finances, knowing already that this was a terrible idea. When I expressed my concerns to Audrey that night, she was uncharacteristically emotional. "Dad would not ask if it was not important," she insisted. "Their company has supported our lifestyle in so many ways. We need to help when they need us." Against my better judgment and business sense, I transferred $200,000 to Richard's company the next day. There was no formal loan agreement despite my requests for paperwork. "We are family," Richard said dismissively. "The money will be back to you with interest before you know it." The money vanished into the black hole of Maxwell Development Group with nothing to show for it. When I inquired about the status of the Lakeside project 3 months later, Richard became evasive. "We pivoted to another opportunity," was all he would say. Through a college friend who worked in commercial banking, I learned that Maxwell Development had leveraged the same properties multiple times with different lenders, a practice that bordered on fraud. They were playing a shell game, using new investor money to pay obligations to previous investors rather than completing projects. Despite the obvious financial strain, Richard and Elaine maintained their lavish lifestyle. They still hosted extravagant parties. Elaine still wore new designer outfits to every function, and they still took their annual month-long European vacation. But rumors were beginning to circulate in their social circle. Other developers stopped partnering with them, and I noticed several of their longtime friends making excuses to avoid their invitations. Audrey remained in complete denial. "People are just jealous of their success," she insisted when I tried to discuss what I had heard. She continued spending as if nothing had changed, returning from shopping trips with bags from the most expensive stores and planning costly renovations to our home. The collapse, when it finally came, was spectacular and public. The front page of the business section featured a devastating exposé: Maxwell Development Group under investigation for investor fraud. The article detailed how Richard had been operating a scheme for years, using new investment money to pay returns to earlier investors while siphoning millions into offshore accounts. Multiple lawsuits were filed within days. The FBI seized computers and documents from their offices. Their assets were frozen pending investigation, including the house they had given us, which turned out to still be in their company's name. Richard and Elaine faced criminal charges along with civil suits from dozens of angry investors. Their social standing evaporated overnight. Former friends publicly denounced them, and they were asked to resign from boards and clubs that had once welcomed them as royalty. Audrey was devastated, but her anger was directed at everyone except her parents. She blamed the media, the jealous competitors, the unfair legal system, and occasionally me for not standing up for them more forcefully. She refused to accept that her parents had done anything wrong, even when the evidence was overwhelming. When Richard and Elaine lost their mansion to asset forfeiture, Audrey insisted they move into our guest house, creating a toxic new dynamic in our home. They treated me like a servant in my own house, while continuing to advise Audrey on how to protect herself financially from the fallout of their crimes. Throughout this chaos, my business continued to thrive. The cautious approach Richard had mocked had insulated me from the economic downturn. I had diversified my client base and maintained healthy cash reserves. This success only increased the tension as Richard made snide comments about beginner's luck, and Audrey grew increasingly resentful of the stark contrast between my stability and her parents' disgrace. I tried to be supportive, encouraging Audrey to seek therapy to process the dramatic changes in her life. She refused, instead spending more time with her parents in the guest house, emerging only for meals or to ask for money. The emotional distance between us grew into a chasm, and I began to wonder if our marriage could survive her family's fall from grace. The gradual deterioration of our marriage accelerated as Audrey's parents settled into our guest house. I found myself working longer hours, partly to maintain my growing business, but also to avoid the hostile environment at home. Richard would criticize my business decisions over breakfast. Elaine would make passive-aggressive comments about the quality of our home throughout the day, and Audrey would give me the silent treatment if I dared suggest they might look for their own place soon. One evening, returning home earlier than expected, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the core. Richard was speaking to Audrey in the kitchen, unaware of my presence in the hallway. "You need to be smart now, Audrey. Bennett's business is the only real asset left that they cannot touch. You need to secure your future before the inevitable divorce." "What if he does not want a divorce?" Audrey asked. Richard laughed coldly. "Men like him always trade up when they get successful. He will leave you just like your mother and I always warned. You need to be prepared." I slipped back out the front door, sat in my car for an hour, and tried to process what I had heard. The in-laws, who had never thought I was good enough, were now assuming I would abandon their daughter after their fall from grace. The irony was painful. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small valuables disappearing from our home: a watch, cufflinks, a signed baseball I had kept from childhood. Audrey claimed no knowledge of their whereabouts, suggesting I had simply misplaced them. I decided to install a comprehensive security system, telling my wife it was for general safety, given the high-profile nature of her parents' legal troubles. The real purpose was to monitor our home while I was away. I did not expect what the cameras revealed just 3 days later. While reviewing the footage from my office, I watched as Audrey brought a man into our home in the middle of the day. They kissed passionately in the entryway before heading upstairs to our bedroom, staying there for nearly 2 hours. I felt physically ill but forced myself to keep watching as they emerged disheveled and laughing. I recognized the man as Jackson Wells, the son of one of Richard's former business partners. The Wells family had distanced themselves from the Maxwells when the fraud allegations first surfaced, which made this development even more surprising. Rather than confront Audrey immediately, I hired a private investigator to document the extent of the affair. Within 2 weeks, I had a comprehensive file, photographs of them, meeting at hotels, transcripts of text messages, discussing their future together, and evidence that their relationship predated not only her parents' downfall but our marriage itself. One message from Audrey to Jackson particularly stood out. B still has no idea about us. Being with him is like living with a reliable appliance. Necessary but boring. Not like with you. I also discovered something that made the betrayal even more calculating. Richard and Elaine knew about the affair and approved. Text messages showed Richard advising Audrey on how to keep it hidden from me, while suggesting she secure assets before making any moves toward divorce. Armed with this evidence, I finally confronted Audrey one evening after her parents had gone to a meeting with their attorneys. "I know about Jackson," I said calmly, placing printed photos on the kitchen table. "I know this has been going on since before we were married." I expected denial, tears, perhaps even remorse. Instead, Audrey's expression shifted from shock to a strange cold relief. "Well, now you know," she said, examining her manicure. "What do you expect me to say?" "An explanation might be appropriate," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "An apology, perhaps." She laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "For what?" "For finding passion where I could not find it with you. Jackson and I have history. We have always had a connection that you and I never did. Then why marry me at all?" Her eyes narrowed. "You know why. You were safe, stable. The kind of guy my parents wanted me to settle down with after Jackson refused to commit. You were supposed to be the reliable husband who built a nice, comfortable life while I found fulfillment elsewhere." The casual cruelty of her admission left me speechless. She continued, seemingly relieved to finally speak her truth. "It was never supposed to matter this much. You were not supposed to find out. But now that everything else has fallen apart, Jackson and I realized we do not need to hide anymore." When I asked if she wanted a divorce, her answer was calculating. "Let me discuss the financial implications with my parents first. The prenup complicates things." The next day, Richard and Elaine confronted me in my home office. Rather than being ashamed of their daughter's infidelity, they were indignant about my discovery of it. "Every marriage has its arrangements," Richard stated, as if discussing a business deal. "Audrey has certain needs that perhaps you do not fulfill. A man in your position should be grateful to have married into our family at all. Looking the other way would be the sensible choice." That was the moment I realized they had never seen me as a person worthy of basic respect. I was simply a financial safety net for their daughter, and now by extension for them. I scheduled an appointment with my attorney the following morning, bringing copies of all the evidence I had gathered. Mark Stevens had been my lawyer since I started my business and had advised against signing the prenup years earlier. He reviewed the infidelity evidence with a professional detachment that helped me maintain my own composure. When he pulled out the prenuptial agreement from his files, his expression changed to one of surprised realization. "Bennett," he said slowly, "have you actually reviewed this document since you signed it?" I admitted I had not, as the memories associated with it were too unpleasant. "The infidelity clause," he said, highlighting a section. "It was written as a general provision, applicable to either party, not just to you specifically." I read the section carefully. "In the event that either party engages in infidelity during the marriage, as evidenced by documentation deemed sufficient by a court of law, said party shall forfeit all claims to the separate property of the party, non-infringing spouse, and shall pay to the non-infringing spouse a settlement of no less than 25% of their separate property holdings." A provision intended to protect Audrey from a gold-digging husband would now protect me from her betrayal instead. "File the divorce papers immediately," I told Mark, "and make sure the court receives all the evidence of infidelity." The Maxwell family's reaction to the divorce filing was a study in entitlement and disbelief. Audrey called me screaming the day she was served with papers. demanding to know how I could do this to her when her family was already suffering. I did not take the call, letting it go to voicemail and forwarding the recording to my attorney as additional evidence of her character. 3 days later, I received a call from her lawyer, a nervous young man who had clearly just reviewed the prenuptial agreement and the evidence of infidelity. "Mr. Anderson, my client is interested in discussing an amicable settlement outside the specific terms of the prenuptial agreement," he said cautiously. "I am not interested in negotiations," I replied. "The prenup your client's family insisted upon is quite clear regarding infidelity. I expect its terms to be enforced exactly as written." The irony was lost on no one. The document drafted by Richard's attorneys to protect his daughter from me was now going to cost her significantly. Under its terms, Audrey would forfeit any claim to my now thriving business. Additionally, because of the infidelity clause, she would owe me 25% of her separate property, which included substantial trust holdings that had been shielded from her parents' legal troubles. Richard and Elaine attempted to have the prenup invalidated, claiming I had coerced their daughter into the infidelity clause. This desperate claim fell apart when their own emails from the time of drafting were presented, showing Richard specifically demanding the severe consequences for cheating as a character test for me. The judge, already familiar with the Maxwells from their fraud case, was unsympathetic to their arguments. The court finds it curious that the parties who insisted upon this agreement now find its terms unconscionable when applied as written, he noted dryly. As the divorce proceeded, Audrey was forced to liquidate her designer wardrobe and jewelry collection to pay her legal fees and prepare for the settlement. The diamond necklace I had given her for our last anniversary, which she had once dismissed as quaint, was among the first items she sold. Richard and Elaine faced their own legal reckoning. With mounting evidence of deliberate fraud, they accepted a plea deal that included disgorgement of assets, substantial fines, and 18 months in a minimum security prison. Their remaining friends abandoned them completely. The prestigious Maxwell name became synonymous with scandal and deceit. I offered Audrey a modification to the settlement. I would reduce the financial penalty if she agreed to complete therapy and acknowledge her role in the deception of our marriage. Her response was a text message that read simply, "Go to hell." The divorce was finalized 8 months after I discovered the affair. As part of the settlement, I allocated the $200,000 I received from Audrey's separate property to repay myself for the loan to her father's business. It felt like closing a circle of deception that had begun the day I met the Maxwells. The year following the divorce was transformative. I expanded my business into 2 new states, developed a proprietary security software package that attracted attention from major corporations, and purchased a lakefront home that I furnished exactly to my taste without anyone criticizing my choices as common or uninspired. I also met Zoe, a pediatrician whose warmth and authenticity were immediately apparent. On our 3rd date, she suggested we discuss our financial philosophies and past relationships openly. "I believe in starting with complete transparency," she explained. "My ex-husband hid gambling debts from me, so I learned the hard way that money secrets can destroy trust." Her straightforwardness was refreshing, after years of manipulation and hidden agendas. When our relationship became serious, we consulted financial planners together and drafted an agreement that protected both of us while emphasizing partnership rather than suspicion. There was no mention of family wealth or status, just 2 independent adults planning a future based on mutual respect. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that Audrey and Jackson's relationship imploded within months of my divorce filing. Without her family's wealth and connections, Jackson apparently found Audrey less appealing. He ended things via text message and was engaged to the daughter of another prominent developer within weeks. Richard and Elaine served their abbreviated sentences and emerged with their arrogance somehow intact, if their occasional quotes in local business publications were any indication. They moved to Florida, where Richard attempted to rebuild with investors who recognize opportunity when conventional wisdom fails. I wished their new investors better due diligence than I had exercised. The prenuptial agreement that was meant to protect the Maxwells from a man they deemed unworthy had ultimately protected me from them instead. The document, designed with such careful mistrust, became the instrument of justice when their true characters were revealed. I do not regret signing it anymore. That signature was part of a painful journey that eventually led me to genuine happiness and self-respect. I learned that people who begin relationships by protecting themselves from you are revealing more about their own character than yours. True partnerships are not built on protecting yourself from the person you claim to love. They are built on choosing someone whose values align with yours, someone who sees building a life together as more important than protecting their assets from you. I found that partnership only after living through its opposite. Has karma ever worked in your favor when someone tried to take advantage of you? Share your story in the comments below. If this tale of ironic justice satisfied you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about relationships, betrayal, and redemption. And please share this video with someone who might need a reminder that sometimes the protection someone builds against you becomes the wall they trap themselves behind. Thank you for listening. And remember, the right person will want to build with you, not against you.